Imagine a morning. No date, no calendar, no written law, just a fire burning low at the edge of a settlement, and a crowd gathering around it. Not for warmth. They are watching something. Someone. A man is kneeling at the center of the group. His hands are bound behind him with woven grass. He is not struggling. He already knows what comes next. We tend to think of punishment as a modern invention, a system, courts, judges, written codes. We imagine ancient humans as people who simply reacted, impulsively, violently, without structure. That is almost certainly wrong. What archaeologists have found in the bones and settlements of our earliest ancestors tells a different story, a far more disturbing one. Ancient punishment was not the absence of order. It was order in its most raw, unfiltered form. And the logic behind it was not cruel. It was rational, which in some ways makes it far more unsettling. To understand why ancient humans punished the way they did, you first need to understand what they were afraid of. Not pain, not death. They had seen both. What they feared most was disorder. A small band of 30, 40, 60 people surviving on the edge of a landscape that was actively trying to kill them could not afford internal collapse. One person who hoarded food, one person who attacked another unprovoked, one person who took what did not belong to them. That person was not just a nuisance. They were an existential threat. In 2016, researchers studying hunter-gatherer societies in Central Africa documented something that had been suspected but never fully confirmed. Among small band societies, the most reliable predictor of group survival was not hunting skill. It was not physical strength. It was not even intelligence. It was internal cooperation. And cooperation, researchers discovered, was enforced, not always gently. The earliest form of punishment was not violence. It was something quieter, something the human psyche finds in many ways more devastating. It was silence. In a band of 50 people living in the open, exposed to predators, dependent on collective memory and collective labor. To be rejected by the group was not a social inconvenience. It was a death sentence. Delayed, but almost certain. Before organized violence, before exile, before anything resembling a trial, there were glances, a refusal to share food, a deliberate silence when someone spoke, a turning of backs. Primatologists studying chimpanzee social groups have observed nearly identical behavior. A chimp who violates the group's unspoken social contract, who takes without contributing, who attacks without provocation, is not necessarily killed. First, it is ignored. And the weight of that ignoring registers in the nervous system the same way physical pain does. The same neural pathways, the same activation patterns. We did not invent social punishment. We inherited it. But exclusion alone was not always enough. There are violations that threaten a group not just socially, but physically. And for those, early humans developed something more deliberate, something that had rules, even if those rules were never written. Christopher Boehm, an anthropologist at the University of Southern California, spent decades studying what he called reverse dominance hierarchies, the way small human societies actively suppress the emergence of bullies, tyrants, and rule breakers. His conclusion was striking. In most hunter-gatherer societies he studied, execution was rare. And when it happened, it was almost never impulsive. It was deliberate. It was communal. It was, by any reasonable definition, a decision. The group would discuss the offender, sometimes for days, not in any formal sense, but in the way that matters, quietly, persistently, building consensus until the outcome felt inevitable. And then they would act, together, because if only one person carried out the punishment, that person might be seen as the aggressor. The community's judgment had to be shared. The responsibility had to be distributed. This is a pattern that appears again and again across completely unconnected cultures. Among the Kungsan of the Kalahari, among the Inuit of the Arctic, among isolated groups in the Amazon basin, different continents, different languages, different environments. Same logic. The punishment was never supposed to feel personal. It was supposed to feel like gravity, like something that simply had to happen. When we move forward in time to the first settled civilizations, something changes. The group becomes larger. Strangers begin to live together. And the mechanisms of informal punishment begin to break down, because you cannot shame a man with silence when he doesn't know your name. You cannot exile someone from a community of 10,000. This is the moment when punishment transforms from something organic into something architectural. The first written law we have, the Code of Ur-Nammu from Mesopotamia, dating to approximately 2100 BCE, is not what most people expect. Most people, if asked to imagine ancient law, imagine something like an eye for an eye, proportional, visceral, symmetrical. The code of Ur-Nammu is different. Many of its punishments are fines, silver, grain, livestock. The ancient Sumerians had developed something recognizable as a restorative justice system. The goal was not vengeance. The goal was compensation. The goal was to restore equilibrium. Consider what that implies. These were not primitive people operating on instinct. They were people who had reasoned their way to a conclusion that many modern legal systems still debate, that punishment should repair, not simply retaliate. And they reached that conclusion without a single university, without a philosophy department, without Aristotle or Kant or any legal theorist whose name we know. They reached it the same way we reach most important truths, by living through the consequences of not having it. But Ur-Nammu's code is not the whole picture. Alongside it, in nearly every early civilization, there exist punishments of a different kind. Punishments designed not to compensate, but to communicate. It was about the audience. The punishment was a performance. And every civilization that used it understood on some level exactly what it was performing. Power, not the power to kill. Any predator had that. The power to decide. The power to draw a line in the social fabric and say, this side is order, and that side is chaos, and we choose order. Hammurabi's code, written in Babylon around 1754 BCE, is one of the most analyzed legal documents in history. Its famous principle, an eye for an eye, is almost always misunderstood. Most people read it as a call for revenge. In its original context, it was a call for limits. It was not saying you may take an eye. It was saying you may take only an eye, no more. In a world where blood feuds could spiral between families for generations, where the murder of one man could justify the slaughter of an entire clan, the concept of proportionality was not barbaric. It was revolutionary. Ancient Egypt brought its own architecture to punishment. And what is strange, what researchers still find difficult to fully explain, is how rarely it relied on death. The most feared punishment in ancient Egypt was not execution. It was erasure, to have your name carved from stone, to have your image defaced, to be removed from the record. In a civilization that organized its entire metaphysics around the permanence of legacy, where the soul's survival in the afterlife depended on the continued pronunciation of your name by the living, to be erased was to be destroyed not just in this life, but in every life after it. Damnatio memoriae, the Romans would later call it, the condemnation of memory. There is something worth sitting with here. In the earliest human bands, the worst punishment was social exclusion from the living. In the first great civilizations, the worst punishment was exclusion from the dead. The mechanism had changed. The logic had not. Ancient China, operating in parallel, largely disconnected from the Near East, developed what historians now call the five punishments, a formal hierarchy of consequences calibrated with deliberate precision, from tattooing to amputation to exile to death. Each grade not just more severe than the last, but designed to communicate exactly how severe the breach of social order had been. The body itself became the text, the punishment, the sentence. In ancient Chinese legal philosophy, the physical marking of an offender was not primarily a deterrent. It was a classification, a permanent announcement to the community and to the offender themselves of where they stood in relation to the social contract. This is the idea that most disturbs modern sensibilities, not the pain, the labeling, the idea that a human being could be permanently reclassified, permanently marked, permanently other. And yet, if you look carefully, you can see the ghost of this logic in systems we still use, in the permanent criminal record, in the registered offender list, in the background check that follows a person across every application, every housing form, every interview, for the rest of their life. The medium has changed. The message has not entirely. In ancient Rome, the relationship between crime and punishment reached a kind of terrible sophistication. The Romans were extraordinary legal architects. They built systems to classify offenses, to define intent, to distinguish accident from malice. And yet, the arena existed. The arena is a problem. Not because it was violent. Violence has always existed. But because it was popular. Because tens of thousands of people would gather willingly, joyfully, to watch suffering as entertainment. And the question that hangs over the arena is, what does that tell us about the people who watched? about what they needed to see, about what it gave them. Some researchers suggest the arena served as a kind of moral theater. The condemned were not seen as ordinary people. They were symbols of disorder, of transgression, of the forces the city had defeated. To watch them die was not cruelty. It was, in the Roman mind, civic ritual, a reaffirmation of the boundary between what Rome was and what it refused to be. Whether you accept that explanation or not, it reveals something important. Punishment, throughout human history, has never been purely about the punished. It has always been about the witnesses. Here is the thread that runs through all of it. From the small band on the open steppe, turning their backs on the man who took more than his share, to the stone tablet with its carved hierarchies of consequence, to the arena's roar, to the databases and registers and permanent digital records of today. Every system of punishment ever devised by human beings was built on the same foundational question. How do we hold ourselves together? How do we take a group of creatures, each one frightened, each one self-interested, each one capable of extraordinary harm, and persuade them, or force them, or shame them into remaining a society? Punishment was never just about the person who transgressed. It was about every person watching. It was a reminder. This is what happens when the contract breaks. Remember the contract. We tell ourselves that modern justice is different, more humane, more rational, more scientific. In some ways, that is true. In other ways, in the way we use shame as a weapon, in the way we design systems that mark people permanently, in the way we gather digitally around public humiliations, we are closer to that ancient campfire than we prefer to admit. The fire burns differently now, but we are still standing around it, still watching, still deciding together who belongs and who does not.